Senators, now we're live.
Great, thanks.
Welcome back, everybody. We're going to continue on with draft number 7.3 on S263. We have in the room with us Cassie Polimas, Kevin Gaffney, and Joyce Manchester. I think Kevin Gaffney and Joyce are primarily here on paid leave and minimum wage, and Cassie's here on the VITA, the new VITA forgivable loan program. Let's start with Cassie. If other folks want to hang in there, we'll probably get to you in about 15 or 20 minutes. Good morning, Cassie. How are you?
Good morning, Cassie Polimas, Vermont Economic Development Authority. Thank you. I am well. How are you?
We're hanging in there. It's good to be back. So we want to know if we know that the program is new and was in sort of development stages early on and got more detail as went through. Can you refresh our memories exactly how this program is going to work, and if there's been any changes since the last time you were in, which I think probably was a couple of weeks ago?
Sure. Just to cut to the chase, there are no material changes on my end since I was in here a couple of weeks ago.
Section
The
4.
program is designed as a forgivable loan program, so it's not a straight up grant program, but the spirit of it is that the loans will be forgiven if the money is used as intended. For those businesses that are still struggling from the effects of the pandemic, whether it's because of closures or increased expenses, reduced revenues, all those variables that can significantly impact a business's ability to generate sufficient working capital to continue moving forward. So this is a working capital program. It's not for capital expenditures, and it's designed to be more flexible than, say, the SBA Paycheck Protection Program, which was very much geared towards the payroll. This is not going to have that kind of requirement that the majority of the money be going to one specific type of expense. It's really broader than that. It also is designed to take into consideration that we're in a different place now in the pandemic. When the other programs were implemented, we were kind of like at the height of the pandemic, things, abruptly shut down. And it was, let's get, the money out quickly so that we can keep people employed, keep places open that need to stay open. At this point in time, what we are addressing is the need to help those businesses that may not have received enough financial help from the previous programs to really replenish or make up for that loss in their working capital to keep them healthy financially and keep going and stay open. And so the key here is to build more flexibility into it so that we can take into account the particular circumstances or stories that the businesses need to tell in order to justify why the pandemic has impacted them negatively beyond the subsidies that they may have already received. So that's the sort of the structure of the program. I think, we've all heard from the sectors that are likely to apply. The ones that are still suffering are hospitality and some travel and tourism. I'm talking about like bed and breakfasts, places that were closed or only allowed to be partially open, as well as arts and culture. So those are the sectors that I would expect would probably be the most interested in the program. I haven't but I, at this point, we're not ruling out any other sectors that may also qualify.
So,
Cassie, I personally feel like at this stage in the pandemic, we've heard from a lot of businesses that where somebody lost a job at the beginning of the pandemic, somebody had to go home and do more childcare. There were reasons that are pandemic related why people started a business after the pandemic began. And, many of us also didn't realize how long this would be going on. We thought, okay, I just weathered an economic storm, or I lost my job and I'm going to open a business because I think we're on the other side of this. And that might have been a year ago or more. We've so often had to go back and start to say, okay, what resources do we have for businesses that opened in the pandemic? And I think we're still in this place of almost punishing them or saying that was a poor choice. And for a lot of people, it was a choice related to survival, or related to better well-being for them and their families. And so I'm just wondering if you could share the ongoing justification for making it limited to those businesses that were operating well before people knew how serious the pandemic was going to be and how long it was going to be.
Those are excellent points. The overriding sort of framework that we have to work within are the ARPA guidelines and eligibility requirements. And although there are some cases or carve-outs for businesses that started up after the pandemic, to meet those requirements is very stringent. So, and as you can imagine, it's hard to, the ARPA money is not designed to take on startup risk, because that's a different risk outside of the pandemic. So being able to identify and quantify the difference between, say, a startup risk versus the pandemic related risks would be the challenge there.
But you're saying per federal guidelines, a business that started after January 27th, 2020 is ineligible or has different requirements that would be placed on them?
They'd have different requirements. And from my take, and I'm not the expert on ARPA, but what I've read is they're very difficult requirements to meet.
Okay, could you send those over?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's been our challenge. And as you may recall, the Department of Economic Development was trying to address the new business challenge earlier. I think one of the pluses, Cassie, with the VITA short-term, what we're kind of calling short-term forgivable loans, just so that people aren't put off by them as long-term debt, and but making it seem more accessible. To me, one of the pluses of this is that you, with your staff, are able to be really take each case individually and work with people to get to yes together and to help together. And I think that's one of the real pluses I see in being able to do this way. Also, the opportunity for people who can satisfy your requirements, have it be a loan that's forgiven within a very short period of time, like a month or something. Which would be
right. And so I think just to kind of take that further is the program needs to be, however it gets drafted, and I hope we'll take a minute to just look at the draft.
Yes, do
that
you have 7.3 with you?
Yeah, I have it up on my screen. Yep,
Okay, great.
So could I ask a question, Cassie?
of course. Mhm.
This language, for some reason, I like it, but I don't know that I've seen it before. Is this language that you provided to us?
Or it's David. Is it you and David together?
I think it's a combination of what I provided this committee and David taking his excellent legal wordsmithing and putting it into the draft. But I do want to, and I don't know if this is the time you want to do that, but I did have a couple of questions or want to ask for some wording tweaks.
Yes, so in a second, we definitely want to do that. So I'm looking at an applicant may demonstrate economic from lost revenue or other, the list of things. So does that mean that somebody who has lost revenue but has not seen a decline in income could qualify for more money?
No. So the way the program is designed is that it could be a combination of any of those. And the ultimate way to measure that is a decline in the net operating income. So there are many different ways that all those variables that go into determining a business's net operating income could go up or down. But at the end of the day, what they have available as their working capital, let's call it, if that has declined materially during the 2-year period, let's say, that is the basis for determining if they meet the eligibility and how much they would get.
So I guess my question, when I look at the $500,000 cap or the actual decline in adjusted net operating income, is it your intent to pay up to that maximum net operating income loss dollar for dollar? What if you get an onslaught of applications and you want to prorate that? In the past, this program, this predecessor programs paid to most of the Vermonters 40% revenue loss, which is a different standard. It didn't make them whole in an effort to spread the money out, I think, more broadly. Where in here does that give you that authority, and is that your intent? How are you going to deal with it?
Well, it would be capped at a maximum of 6 months of their expenses. So whichever is the lesser of those.
Does it say that here, or is that just your intent?
I hope it says that there. If you, let's see.
I don't see it. So that it's 6 months.
Yeah, I think it's on page 45, and it's line 9. Oh, it doesn't have 6 months in there. You're right.
Say 6 months.
Okay, so that should be added in, and that actually I want to focus on that line. So the intent here is a loan shall not exceed the lesser of 500,000 or the cumulative actual decline in adjusted net operating income. 6 months worth of operating expenses would be the maximum amount.
So is there any reason why you chose 6 months, 50% of the differential?
I'm sorry, any reason why 6 months? What was the rest of the question?
I assume the 6 month is designed to pay out 50% of the net operating loss, but why don't we just say 50% of the net operating loss from year to year? Why are we saying 6 months?
taking 6
Why
months.
should happen?
Well, so the thought is that it's pre-pandemic, okay? What their normal year operating expenses were at that time is getting them back to that level. So a lot of businesses have reduced their overhead and cut back on a lot of things, but that's not necessarily sustainable. So getting them back to what is a sustainable level is the intent.
So there's a difference between paying 50% of the year-to-year net operating decrease than picking out the 6 months you want to choose to do the comparison. And so that could result in a higher amount than just doing 50%.
Right.
And was it your choice? I think this is the first time I've seen, maybe it's not, forgive me if I'm wrong, the $500,000 cap. I think in previous iterations, we've seen caps of 150,000, 300,000. Where did this 500,000 come from?
It was, to potentially address some of the larger businesses that may have had a, significant decline. And then the mitigating part of that is that it's still capped at 6 months of expenses. So, it's not a magic number. If the committee is more comfortable with something smaller, that's fine. I don't have a line drawn in the sand that it has to be 500,000. It just was to provide that flexibility that
Right.
there may be a business out there that needs more than that. And keep in mind also that the calculation for the net operating income it incorporates all the other subsidies, grants, PPPs that they have received. So that goes into that calculation, so that the decline has to be after that's already accounted for.
You wouldn't double count, right? How are the previous federal and state grants incorporated into net operating income? So if you included that as part of their operating income, then came up with net operating loss from year to year or 6 months to 6 months.
Yeah, I don't think it's an apples to apples comparison, because I think the grant programs have used different formulas, and my gut says it's not necessarily based on net operating income. It may have been reduced revenues. It could have been a flat amount. So it's a little bit different when you're talking about a straight up grant versus something like this.
I guess what I'm getting at, it's a little bit of a technical question, is a business already has a smaller loss if the grant they receive is reported on their tax return. So their loss is less, and now you're going to hit them again by saying that's going to be deducted from the net operating loss. Are you following me? We should take this conversation offline.
Yeah, and I think I think I'm following you, but yeah, this is getting very much into the details and the weeds. And what we would do in our underwriting process is, yes, we look at that tax return, but we're asking also what's not on the tax return. For instance, is the PPP on here or not, depending on how the federal tax treatment of various other grants and awards is. So we'll take that all into consideration to look at what they've received in total, and then do the calculation to say, okay, they received enough money, they're good, they're back where they were, or no, they did not receive enough money, they're still down and they're still struggling. and here's how we'll calculate how much more they need.
Decided yet in terms of this program? I don't see there's any direction one way or another in these guidelines. Whether there should be like a rolling enrollment program like with the capital investment program, take 3 months of applications and then review them. I mean, there may be some, if you do just first come, serve, you may find that you're overspending or underspending, depending on how many people come forward. Is there some value to saying, okay, collect applications for a few months and say, this program looks like it's really popular, and we're going to lower the maximum grant so we can help a lot more people. Or it looks like how many people that we can raise the maximum grant to give them, or to give you some discretion on that based upon what materializes.
Yeah. You know, we're not set up to do a grant-like deployment of it. VITA can do the, you know, first come, first serve, which is how the PPP program was managed. I have talked to folks from the 2 sectors I previously mentioned, and if that's the way the committee would like this managed, then we would need and want to rely upon sort of those sectors helping us with that inflow and pipeline and managing that, if you will, because we are not set up and don't have the resources to do that. I mean, that's more of a grant model.
Right. Different model.
Isn't this program envisioned effectively as a forgivable loan program?
Yeah.
That virtually all of these will either quickly be forgiven or over time be forgiven. You just have to double back to make sure they spent the money in the way to address the need.
Correct.
Otherwise, I mean, if it was a loan program, it wouldn't even meet the ARPA guidelines, right? It was a straight loan program. Or you'd have to give the money back to the feds when you got the money back.
Right. If the loan is not, that's my understanding, if the loan is not forgiven, the borrower, if it ends up being a borrower, would have to pay VITA back. And then VITA would need to give that money to the state to then reobligate it somewhere else. Otherwise, it has to go back to Treasury.
Well, it goes back to Treasury, I think, because it's ARPA.
Do we have to forgive, in order to avoid that, do we have to forgive the loan by a certain date?
By 2026.
2020, well, I think the ARPA deadline is 2024.
2026.
26?
But you can allocate it up through 2024. That's our understanding. And Jess is nodding her head, so I'm feeling like we're in the right direction.
Well, the allocation thing is obligated by that date. I would imagine that White House or whatever would say that that's equivalent to making, you have to make a decision to forgive it by 24. You may not have to. We'll find that out.
Yeah, we'll find out. I think that's a question because I think that I would assume that under the Treasury guidelines, you would have till 26.
Yeah.
The final action on all of this has to be completed by 2026.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, you know, obviously that's not the goal here to give any money back. And so the more time the state has to reallocate any money, I think the better. So that's why, you know, if it does convert to a loan, we're saying you got a year to repay it so that the state can figure out how to reobligate the money or reallocate it to another program.
So in this draft, we have the same language for VITA as we did for the capital investment grants, which has you working with the joint fiscal office, or at least consulting with them before you come up with program guidelines and run them by the joint fiscal committee. Do you have any problems with that?
I certainly don't have any problems. I just want to make sure that it doesn't get too detailed, because the risk there is the businesses that are still out there that need money aren't going to neatly fall into a formula, one Formula One box.
Well, we're not passing any judgment on what that would look like. We're just saying consult with joint fiscal. They may have some other ideas or concerns. And then whatever you want to bring forward to joint fiscal, that would be the program, assuming they approve it. But so it's just a more detailed review process before the program goes forward.
But I mean, I hate to ask the obvious, but VITA is a little different than an agency of state government. I mean, I think of VITA as, I mean, you're like asking VHF. I mean,
I understand.
Your own authority.
I understand that, but my feeling is we have enough evidence from PPP and all the problems that existed there, the money not being targeted appropriately. And this is like a forgivable loan program like that I just would like to see a second set of eyes.
Right.
And it's just transparency. That's all. I mean, you still have the authority to bring forward your best plan possible. Okay, you said you had some concerns with the language. You want to just go?
And Dave, we apologize. David Hull isn't with us. He's in-house commerce. We haven't figured out how to divide or clone David. We're working on it, but sadly, there's not enough ARPA money to do that.
Yeah, no, David's in high demand. I know. Well, it's just minor, but we were looking at that section. Let's see, it's line 9 there on page 45.
It's section D on page 45. Would you send him? Would you obviously review with us now? But then if you'd be kind of to send that to him as
sure. Yeah. Right. So just to clarify that it's the cumulative decline in the adjusted net operating income from pre-pandemic to the most recent, presumably 2021 results. So in other words, if we're talking, it's probably easiest to give you an example. So a material decline would be like 25% decline in net operating income. But if a company had a 15% decline between 2019 and 2020, and then in 2021 was flat, between those 2 years, you've got a combined 30% decline. Now the overriding, eligibility criteria is that decline and that continued decline is due to ARPA, not other factors going on. But that's a cumulative 30% decline in those 2 years. And for a small business to lose a combined 30% in their working capital to keep going into 2022 and 2023, that's significant. So that was my tweak there. And then down below on line 19, it references grants instead of forgivable loans.
Right. Got it.
And on line 2,
Cassie, sorry, just as we talk about them, do you want us to preface them with short-term forgivable loans? Just given the ARPA guideline, I mean, to me, short-term is anything under 10 years.
Yeah, that's fine. That doesn't impact because they're going to be very short-term. Yes.
Yeah. I think it helps with the image of it and helps with the reality.
Yep. And then the last thing I just wanted to clarify is on page 46, the second line there at the very end. Well, I'll just read the whole sentence. It says, when considering whether and how to prioritize economic sectors that had suffered economic harm due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the agency may designate one or more sectors for priority funding, et cetera. I just want to make sure it's clear that ACCD and not VITA, because in the summary, the table puts VITA as having that ability, and I think it's appropriate for the agency, for ACCD.
Right, okay.
So ACCD mentioned there specifically?
Yeah, she does. So the agency, we want to clarify that the agency is ACCD.
Right.
Right. Right.
So one question I have before you go is on page 45, subsection 3. When assessing an applicant's adjusted net operating income, the authority shall consider previous COVID-19 state and federal subsidies, reasonable owner's compensation, non-cash expenses, and other adjustments needed. We're just using reasonable owner's compensation there. That means that if a owner reduced their salary or their compensation during COVID period, this program is going to help pay them back for that lost income, past income.
Correct. Up to a certain amount, so up to 100,000. So, you know, if somebody.
Where does it say that, or that's just in your plan?
I don't think the 100,000 is in there, but that was my proposal to the committee when we first started talking about this.
And your understanding, I know this is a question for the experts, that something like that is consistent with ARPA guidelines?
Yes, that's my understanding. You know, if the owner had to take a significant pay cut to keep their employees paid or for other reasons, within a reasonable amount of money, that's payroll, and that owner has suffered. Maybe that owner has had to take their child out of daycare. I don't know. There's all kinds of scenarios that you could imagine.
And in your world, when you do this in other programs as well, you're going to be going in depth on these loans, so people's individual circumstances, to figure out what the appropriate grant amount is at this level of detail, that level of detail. Okay. So I mean, that's interesting. When I hear it that way, when we propose income replacement for workers who were laid off, they've suffered in the past a lot of hardship. If they're replacing owner salaries, you know, maybe we should replace income of individuals who've lost their job for a period. That's not for you, Ken, yes.
What we do a bit. We can't, not fully.
Okay. Thank you very much. Stay tuned. Yes, I'm sorry.
I think this, you know, just thinking about who's prioritized in this has raised a kind of lingering question for me, just being newer to economic development. I understand that, you know, childcare's function as a social service, an educational institution, and a business. And I keep hearing from them how hard hit they are in the pandemic. Are they considered a business that's prioritized for suffering economic harm, or do they have a separate fund that they're receiving support through?
My understanding, we can check with Jane, but they're getting, and we can check with Health and Welfare, but my understanding is they're getting very direct subsidies and help through a different channel. And I can't tell you what it is, but
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it's a huge amount of money because they're direct subsidies in ARPA for childcare.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we can clarify that, but I'm pretty sure, but I think that
But
this.
they could qualify
They-
under this last
Absolutely,
section.
they have
Yeah.
in other ACCD programs.
I
right,
mean, I
Jazz?
assume ACCD would probably,
We
because
had
they have in the
childcare
past,
that-
Right.
Yeah.
as a sector that's been hard hit. And
Yeah.
whether that gives them more points or how, I
Mhm.
mean, this is one of the reasons why I want joint fiscal involved, because we can't design this program
Right.
in this environment ourselves. They'll have months or weeks sitting here with expertise on what's happened in the past, and
Yeah.
so getting a group of people together to do with it.
But also significantly in the capital investment program, there are actually quite a few childcare
For better
that have,
ventilation.
well, yes, that are regionally transformative for childcare for working families. So
Yeah,
that they definitely are, but I'm pretty sure there are a number of different pots that childcare, aid for childcare is. And remember, we did the retention grants too in the BAA.
right. I just hear sometimes the subsidies are contingent on enrollment, which is very hard for them to manage right now.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping, that there are lots of ways that they can stay afloat, because I keep hearing how stressed.
Okay, so thank you, Cassie. You're gonna get some language to David.
I can do that.
For all of for page 45 and 46, those two, I've got notes to give him, but if you emailed him directly, he'll see them as he's sitting patiently.
And is the language going to clarify, because I didn't fully understand, I'm counting on my vice chair, the example you gave of losses over 2 years and how.
Oh, yeah, I don't have that.
Is there going to be language that clarifies that?
Yeah, I can add a couple of words just to say that it's cumulative over the period.
And also you have language up above on line 9 after $500,000.
Yes, the 6 months of expenses should be added in. Yep.
So you're, which I hate to prolong this, but so you're suggesting that contrary to previous qualifications where you compare one 6-month period to another 6-month period or 1 year to another year, you're saying net operating losses in your mind can be cumulative over the entire period of COVID. We're gonna not bring people up to their annual or 6-month level of income. We're gonna cover or project their entire loss for the entire period.
It's not going to be based on projections. It will be based on what their pre-COVID operating expenses were. That will determine how much the forgivable loan is.
Pre-COVID operating expenses, or the net operating loss is a 6-month period, pre-COVID, and a 6-month period more recently. And then we're going to compare the profits or income of that business in those 2 6-month periods. Are we going to give them, if we have the money, that amount, or are we going to give them twice that amount?
No, so it would be the lesser of, the 6 months pre-COVID or their cumulative losses over the 2-year period.
The lesser.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, Cassie.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is, I feel that there have been pluses and minuses in the transition from the economic recovery grants, but I actually think that the individual attention and flexibility that FEDA offers is actually a great benefit. So I am hoping that our recipients will feel the same way. I think it will be. So anyway, thank you. Thank you for taking us on, because we know it wasn't easy. And just because we always forget to say thank you when people take on additional burdens, thank you.
Well, thank you, because I know this isn't easy for you. I've been listening to all the housing conversation, which is also extremely important and not easy. But I think that just to kind of round this out, the stakeholders that I have talked to understand that there will be a burden to apply for this loan, and they need to prove their case, and they're ready to do that. So that's meaningful in that they know there's already been a fair amount of money. The ones who continue to suffer are the ones who will go through that process and take this on. So I'm thankful that there are those stakeholders out there that are willing to do that in order to make this work.
Well, they'd have to, in all fairness, they'd have to prove their case. Either way, they have to prove their case. I just think
Yeah.
our criteria last time was even more onerous than we had anticipated, so,
Right, but this is not the PPP program.
no.
We're not calling it PPP. It's the
No, I think
forgivable loan program.
we learned a lot from the PPP program, and this is in some ways a response to the way that was handled. Is that fair?
Yes, thank you. So I think, Kevin, you're going to be briefer, my guess, than Joyce. So let's just go to Kevin.
Is Damien
Thank you.
coming? Bye, Cassie.
Fine.
Damien's joining us at 11:30.
Damien said he was ready whenever you want, just give him a 2-minute notice and you can come right down.
Now?
Look, yeah, why don't you, but we'll hear from Kevin first. Kevin, good morning, how are you?
Good morning, Chair. For the record, Kevin Gaffney, Deputy Commissioner of Insurance at Department of Financial Regulation.
So Kevin,
Yes, I should be brief, but happy to answer any questions you have.
well, we're looking for, once again, an update. And I guess I'm a little confused as to, is this plan that the governor is proposing in motion, or it's sort of in a preliminary stage where you haven't made a decision yet?
Yeah.
Uh,
I can update you on that.
somebody sent us an article, I think it was very revealing, that this seems to be premised on the New Hampshire model.
Oh, we're talking paid family.
Yes.
Okay. Sure.
We're talking about self-commission.
Yeah.
No, we're not talking, we're talking
Specifically,
section 9.
paid family leave as it applies to state employees at this
Right.
point, with
Section
an
9.
option for other people to join. But we understand that, I guess I was surprised to learn that the New Hampshire model on which this has been re-triggered in Vermont was put in into last minute into the budget bill in New Hampshire, and the response there, I understand, among a lot of people, has been really underwhelming. In terms of that plan. So I don't know if that has changed the direction, but why don't you bring us up to date as to where Fishka is? And then I also had asked Commissioner to talk to us about the Essential Person Program from last year and the administration. I don't know if you're prepared to do that as well.
I'm not on that front, but I'm happy to talk through the paid family leave and take away what we need to get back to you on.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I guess to answer your last comment first, I can give you an update on where we are in our process. I think the last time I testified in front of the committee on this issue, I provided you an update after a recent engagement with New Hampshire, with our regulatory counterparts in New Hampshire, and then provided a outline of the New Hampshire program. I haven't since talked to New Hampshire. We're in not quite the middle of the month, so I was expecting their RFP process to finalize later this month. So I had it in my calendar to follow up with them, but I haven't yet because I didn't think there'd be anything to provide an update on the goings on in New Hampshire. On the Vermont front, where we are in the process, and I think I conveyed this the last time in front of the committee, is that we were in the process of an RFI, a request for information, which is a process that allows for a lot of back and forth. You don't have to do an RFI in advance of an RFP, but it's advisable when you have a lot of moving pieces and programs to determine. So where we are in that RFI process is that all the responses came in last Friday on the RFI. There was a lot of back and forth. So in the end, we ended up with 4 serious kind of back and forth engagements with four carriers. That's no guaranteed indication of what we will receive in terms of a RFP response, but based on our brokers are looking at those responses and just kind of combing through them, and we'll boil them down for us to review in the near term. But I think what we're generally encouraged with is that we will likely have the ability to issue an RFP, because we feel like there will be a market response to that. And I think, as the committee probably recalls, that because you mentioned the state employee, but the plan, the RFP structure would be to have a three-phased approach. It would start with a state employee program, and then it would move into a second phase for employers of 20 or more than 20. I don't have that to memory, but employers of a particular size in phase 2, and then the third phase, the individual market. Obviously, the overarching approach to the plan hasn't changed. It would be a voluntary plan that would be primarily administered by private insurance, with some resource impact to human resources.
So this is viewed by the administration as almost a personnel labor contract arrangement. You're not coming forth with any legislation asking for any money. You're just going forward with this. It's going to be part of the state employee's contract. I haven't seen a bill that does this. So is there?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned at the last testimony, I mean, the administration is watching and open to what proposals the legislature puts forth that are kind of consistent with our program, and willing to come up with a solution. But at the same time, we want to just move ahead with because we do see coming out of the pandemic, we see the opportunity to provide this important benefit to employers and their employees. As I said, the last time, we're open to hearing what the legislature offers. Now, I see in this bill you're identifying the use of ARPA funds, and the governor's proposal is pretty clear that those ARPA funds should be used for long-term critical infrastructure and the like, and so that wouldn't be the area that we would support, but we're still open to other incentives.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that you're not open or anything like that. I'm just trying to understand where your authority is to do what you're doing. And how you're paying for the personnel time to do this. I assume it's part of like the Pay Act, or we're doing this for our employees, and this is something that we're doing. But once you go to a larger universe and you're using taxpayer dollars for that, I don't know where the authority is until we speak on it.
Well, I'm happy to kind of bring back those questions to the larger group. I'd rather speak to the insurance mechanism from the DFR perspective.
I think just so you're familiar, I think we're working on what we can do, and one of the options is to piggyback on what you're doing. And we talked about using ARPA dollars. I think we could only use them for a certain period of time. Right. I think the amount of money that would be required is probably far too great for us to go down that. But we would only do it within the guidelines of ARPA. So we pay for the the premiums or help pay for the premiums for these folks, reimburse employers during the period that's allowable for ARPA. And then hopefully there would be enough interest at that point that it might take on a more universal nature, or the legislature would pass something with other funds. So it's not that, I mean, I understand the government's position of wanting to use it for long-term infrastructure, one-time infrastructure needs, but that was the idea.
Right, and Mr. Chair, if I say, I think we were viewing the ARPA money as a bridge.
Exactly.
A bridge into a permanent program. And quite honestly, this is called what I believe some of Washington was calling the human infrastructure. This is a key piece of human infrastructure, which we found clearly in COVID, a necessity that this kind of a pandemic really made family medical leave critically important going forward.
And I can't remember Commissioner Pichek's words, but I think the New Hampshire model, on what you said, is that you might be open to support some partial financing of an expansion to as an incentive to get people to sign up, as opposed to putting that on the employee or on businesses entirely. So, so I think that's what we're. And I think I don't know if you know, if the New Hampshire bill that passed has some money or resources in it beyond paying for their state employees.
Yeah, there are, I think I covered that in the last testimony, but there are some incentives in the New Hampshire plan. There's a premium tax incentive, an offset to their their enterprise business tax.
He's shaking his head, so he'll tell us more about that.
Yeah.
My sense is
Yeah.
the main portions of what the administration wants to ensure is that A, it is a voluntary program, and second, that we don't create something that becomes an ongoing expense after these limited COVID funds, federal funds availability ceases, that we're not creating something that will be a significant ongoing cost to come out of the general fund. Those are my understanding. That's the basis of where the administration is coming from. Is that correct, Commissioner? Based on what you know?
Deputy, but no, I think what we're not comfortable with is the use of ARPA funds. I think there's other incentives that that we gave you, kind of a delay of the New Hampshire program, but don't necessarily, we don't have the same perhaps conditions or structure in New Hampshire exactly. So, we just wanted to convey that we're open to incentives, and those incentives are twofold. And the plan design. Remember, the RFI now, the responses that we receive are gonna inform us as to what the RFP is going to look like. So in terms of plan design, we have to really mull over these responses and then determine what the right plan design will be. So we're not at that point yet. I probably will have, we'll have a more fruitful conversation once we've kind of gotten through those and figured out because again, we don't want to come up with a RFP plan design that isn't going to receive any response from the marketplace. So we're combing through those now, but we realize that some of the mechanisms of this program and the perhaps adverse selection issues in the individual market or even the micro employer market may require some incentives and funds to just maintain the program.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So just so you know, we're probably gonna, if it's not in the bill already, at least add a good study on how to move forward, which I would want to specifically include building upon what you're doing as one of the options. I don't know if that's
It's at
fairy, I don't know if it's fairyland or whatever, but we want to study those things. So we're definitely going to put a study in this bill, I think.
for a task
A
force.
task force. And probably coinciding as you move forward with your RFP process. And then the tougher nut to crack is, can we do anything immediately to help people? And that's a good segue into, I want to ask Joyce if she can, we're going to get to you, Joyce, but can you stick around till noon? We'll probably hear from, split the next half hour between you and Damien. But I would like Damien to put the proposal we have thought of this thus far. It's really a first look at it. And then also then we'll hear some of your numbers on what you have for paid sick days or paid leave, if you can stick with us. But if your schedule doesn't allow, we can take you first.
No, I can stick around. That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Damien, thank you, Kevin. Always good to see you.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.
All right.
Morning.
Oh, I forgot how hard this chair is.
We could put a cushion on it.
That's
We
okay.
noticed that most of the testimony is quite a lot shorter since we moved to a harder chair.
Yeah.
We used to actually have a nice chair.
For the record, Damien Leonard from Legislative Council. I have printed copies if anyone would like them.
Sure.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Of what's not in.
Just my language for 263, the latest version. So.
Okay, well, we're not going to talk about minimum wage or anything else.
Yeah. So we'll page.
This is just paid family leave.
Well,
Minimum wage.
It's got all of my language in it. So
It's got the Damien parts.
the Damien parts, yes. But I'm gonna pull up the language on the screen for everyone who's joining us remotely, if that's okay.
So thoughtful.
Do you want me to start with the paid sick leave grant program or just focus on family leave?
Both.
Yeah.
Okay,
Whatever you want
do
to
both.
Okay.
Okay.
We don't have to talk about the task force. That's could be just the task force.
Okay, well, so right now in this draft, it's just the paid sick leave grant program and the task force.
Right.
The prior draft had something based on the granted state paid leave, but my understanding was that was coming out because we didn't have time to
Right.
dive in that deeply.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll focus on the COVID paid sick leave grant program here.
On section 19, page 2.
Page 2, section 19. So this would establish in the agency of administration a paid sick leave grant program based loosely on the hazard pay program that we did in the first year of the pandemic. And it awards grants to employers to reimburse the cost of providing COVID-19 paid leave to their employees. You'll notice on line 7, the appropriation is left blank, pending Joyce working her magic and helping us get an estimate of what would be there or a determination that you want to limit it to a specific pot of funds. Right now, it's designated as an appropriation from the ARPA funds. That could, of course, be changed to other dollars that are available if there are any available. So the COVID-19 related reasons here to make sure that this is laser focused within the ARPA guidelines, we're targeting this to COVID-19 sick leave. So this wouldn't be reimbursement for sick leave that someone took for, say they had a surgery and took 3
Right.
days off from work or something like this. So it's self-isolating because of a diagnosis or positive test, self-isolating because of a recommendation of a healthcare provider or public health official, or because you're experiencing symptoms of COVID-19, caring for a family member, which for purposes of this, I've lined it up with our paid sick leave law. So it's parent, grandparent, spouse, child, sibling, parent-in-law, grandchild, or foster child. I know we've discussed other definitions of family in past bills, but this is lined up with our existing sick leave law. So
Yeah.
caring for a family member because the school or place of care where that individual is normally located during the employee's workday is closed due to COVID-19, The individual has been requested not to attend the school or place of care due to COVID-19. And so the difference here is dealing with the issues that we've seen more recently, where instead of closing the whole school, they'll tell a class to quarantine, or they'll tell close contacts of an individual to quarantine in some instances. And then, or the individual has been diagnosed or tested positive or recommended to quarantine because of the recommendation of a healthcare provider or public health official, or because they're experiencing symptoms, or, and then the final reason here is attending the appointment for the employee or the employee's family member to receive a vaccine or a booster. And then related to that, experiencing symptoms or caring for a family member who's experiencing symptoms related to receiving that vaccine or booster. So these are all COVID-specific reasons that you can receive reimbursement. Employee is defined more broadly than our existing sick leave law. So our existing sick leave law requires employers to provide sick leave to employees who work at least 18 hours a week on average. This extends it to all employees. Employer is defined as any person that has one or more employees performing services for it in Vermont. This is really just a simpler version of the definition that we have in the sick leave law, which lists all the various legal entities, but those are all encompassed in the term person. Employer does not include the state, a political subdivision of the state, or the United States. And you'll notice I put political subdivision in brackets. So the reasoning for this is that it doesn't make sense for the state to give itself a grant to pay for time off. And also the United States has got its own programs around sick leave for employees. The question here is, do you want to cover political subdivisions like municipalities? And that's why that's bracketed.
Yeah, I would think we would want to cover everybody who's not covered already in some other program.
So then that language would come out there, but that's why I bracketed it, because they are a public entity, but they're also potentially struggling with the very same budget issues that employers are struggling with.
Well,
And they also got a fair amount of money.
yeah, but
So
it's not being probably spent on their employees.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So just before we move on, there's always an attraction to just go with an existing system. So moving away from the definition of employee that we use for paid family sick leave to, you know, usually a lot of these programs have some sort of level of attachment to the workforce or to an employer. Can you just briefly comment on the pros and cons of covering everybody?
So
working 2 hours or something?
the reason that this is broader is the sick leave law and the family and medical leave laws are mandates on employers to provide that coverage. This is a voluntary program for employers to receive reimbursement.
Right.
So it allows an employer who has provided that coverage to all of their employees rather than just the ones covered by law to seek reimbursement for all of those employees. And that's the difference. This is not, this isn't a mandate where we're saying to employers, you have to provide this coverage. We're saying funding is available for the coverage that you provided. And in this too, there is language that the committee to consider regarding whether to provide retroactive coverage if employees had to take unpaid leave.
Right.
So allowing the employer to retroactively pay the employee and then seek reimbursement for that.
Have you been working with Joyce for her numbers to coincide with this latest proposal? Or?
Joyce and I have had some discussions. I think that she has the latest language here because I did this update a little while back. But Joyce, please correct me if I'm wrong about that. Everything has been moving very quickly in the last several days. So, but I think Joyce has this language.
Yeah, and I think this Yeah, I think this is actually a very important piece of this because
Right, so like our sick leave law, it covers all employers, but unlike the sick leave law, it allows employers who've chosen to go above and beyond the minimum requirement to receive reimbursement for anything they've provided. The program period, you'll notice, is right now set for January 1 through December 31 of this year. So that would cover the bulk of the Omicron surge, but it wouldn't cover the Delta surge in the fall. So that's, again, a policy question, but that's where it's been set just for the purposes of the draft.
So sorry, just while we're on that, if we chose to, depending on the gobsmacking numbers that Joyce gives us, what if we were going to look at the Delta surge, which began, as I recall, in October? So we would get a date. Could you figure out the date on that? Because I think it's like October through December, and then December we were so clear on Omicron because that's when the Senate made the decision to stick. So I'm clear on when Omicron was a check, when we were clear about Omicron, but the Delta launch, I want to say it's October because.
Yeah, I mean, I think it
was October through December.
Cases started climbing actually in midsummer, but I don't know when you would define it as a surge, but I could look into that, or, we could certainly ask,
let's
AHS for some dates.
Yeah.
I think in some respects this goes without saying, but I have heard specific cases to the contrary. I'm looking through here to see where the employer can't have fired the employee after the period that they might have compensated them for sick leave.
It's not in here, so that would be something that you could put in there, that the
further protection.
Yeah, can't have terminated the employee. The one thing is you want to be careful with that, though, because you don't want to stay separated, because that would include employees choosing to move on to another job. But if you say the employer can't have terminated the employee, you could certainly add that language in the requirements for the grants. And that, I think, is, I'm trying to think how we did it with hazard pay, because people were, I'm not sure if we had similar language in hazard pay. We definitely did for the UI relief, where you weren't allowed to terminate the employees, or you had to.
Wouldn't that hurt the employee though? I mean, I think we're getting into a little bit more detail before we finish this, but it seemed like if you say you can't have terminated a person, then the worker's never going to get the money.
When you talk about termination, there's such a thing as termination for cause, but you have exceptions to that. You pay the money out, and the employee burglarizes the store and steals all the money, and you can't terminate him.
Or this is very, let's hear.
So, I think this would be, it's a policy issue for the committee to discuss and weigh. If you want to add the language, we would do it in the requirements for the grants. And that would be an easy add to the extent that you can figure out exactly how you want to set that up. Yeah, guardrail it. So going on to page 4, line 12, this allows employers to apply for one or more grants. And then the grant amount would include reimbursement, may include reimbursement for retroactively provided COVID-19 related paid leave. So in other words, the employee took unpaid leave, and then the employer retroactively pays them during the program period, because the employee did not have sufficient accrued paid leave available at the time that the employee took leave.
Right. So
that would be included here. Employers may submit grants for applications not more than once each calendar month for paid leave provided during the program period, either from the beginning of the program period to the date of the application, or from the date of the last application to the current one. And that would reflect some of the, for example, Massachusetts had a similar program where we sort of apply as you go. You can seek periodic reimbursement rather than
Like
having
once
to
a month.
wait until
Yeah.
November and say, okay, here's my full bill.
Yeah, that's important. Just once you're caught, once the retroactive piece is caught up, just to stay.
Yeah. The language on lines 4 through 8 of page 5 related to ERIS solutions is just to allow them to apply for the grant money. They administer the payments to independent direct support providers, the home care professionals, through the state's Choices for Care program. And so rather than having each individual person applying, ERIS Solutions, who does all the payroll, applies in full and gets the reimbursement and disperses the funds. And that's based entirely on what we worked out for the hazard pay and the retention pay bills. So on line 9 of page 5, this starts with the Secretary's requirements. Shall adopt procedures for implementing the program, including a simple application process, a process to allow employers to certify, and a process to allow employers to certify the amount of paid leave provided for COVID-19 related reasons. So essentially, there needs to be some showing that it was COVID-19 related. My understanding with Massachusetts is that they were allowing things like photograph of a positive test result or a copy of that email, doctor's note, etc. And employers would include these with the submission or the email from the school saying we're closed because of COVID-19. The Secretary would also promote awareness and then award grants on a first come, first served basis subject to available funding. This addresses the issue of what if we get more demand than we're expecting, say there's another surge, then this would allow the program, if it runs out of funds, to just stop, which is what happened in Massachusetts. They stopped about 2 weeks or a month early because they just ran out of funding at the end. And then lines 16 to 17 on page 5 allows the Secretary of Administration to delegate administration to other agencies or departments of the state. This is what we did with the hazard pay when we expanded it beyond healthcare professionals. So originally the program was housed in AHS, and then they delegated it out to the other agencies that deal with the private sector. On line 18, we allow the Secretary to enter into contracts, MOUs, and other agreements with private entities as necessary to implement or administer the program. And we waive the requirement for a competitive bid on those contracts to allow that to get stood up more quickly, rather than having to go through the formal RFP process. And we declare the ongoing public health risk posed by COVID-19 on page 6 to be deemed an emergency situation that justifies the execution of a sole source contract under Bulletin 3.5. So this is language directly from the hazard pay program that we used to allow that to get implemented more quickly.
Right. Great. No need to reinvent the wheel.
Yep. And then going into subsection E on page 6, line 5, employers basically can apply for grants in an amount equal to the number of hours of COVID-19 related paid leave multiplied by the greater amount of either the minimum wage or the employee's normal hourly wage. The reason for that language is that this addresses tipped workers who would normally earn a sub-minimum wage, and now they will receive the minimum wage for that paid leave time, which is consistent with the sick leave law. Going on to lines 10 through 18, and these are areas where the committee will have some policy questions if you decide to move forward with this proposal. Lines 10 through 14.
So are we still on page 6 or are we on?
Yes, we're on page 6, thank you.
Can we wrap up in a few minutes?
Sure. So the first key point here is that employers are allowed to seek up to 80 hours of leave for employees, or the average weekly hours that an employee works in 2 weeks. And that's based on the federal sick leave law, which was, this was the amount provided. The amount of reimbursement is also based on the federal sick leave law, and it works out to $63.88 per hour, or a maximum of $5,110 per employee during the program period. So those amounts are key because changing that will dramatically affect the cost of this program.
Sorry. It's down here on line 17 and
Line 17 and 18, this is the maximum amount that you can bill for. It's worth noting, and Joyce may have more information on this, that Massachusetts set that amount much lower. So you may want to reduce that to focus this and just allow partial reimbursement for higher wage employees. And
did they reduce it for lower wage employees?
So basically what Massachusetts set, I forget the amount, it was like $21 an hour. So it meant for employees working up to $21 an hour, you get full reimbursement. For employees working for a higher hourly wage, the employer would only receive partial reimbursement. They still have to pay out sick leave as they would. So if you choose, I think the key here is that they can get reimbursed for providing paid sick leave at the employee's regular hourly wage. That's already required. So it's the greater of the employee's regular wage or the minimum wage.
Right.
And then the only condition right now is that the employer would be required to restore amounts of regular paid leave that the employee used. And so that was something that I think Senator Clarkson asked me to include in this, is that if the employee had exhausted their paid leave and the employer is seeking reimbursement, the employer would restore the days of paid leave that were used that they're getting reimbursed for, and instead just pay that leave out of the state funds.
Yeah.
And the rest is the task force. So
can you come back tomorrow on the task force of minimum wage, you think?
yes, I think Scott has scheduled me already from 9 to 10, and I have some more availability in the morning as well. So
great, we'll be in touch. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We'll jump right into Joyce to get her, I hope not earth-shattering numbers here.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Joyce Manchester, Joint Fiscal Office. I'm going to be using a PowerPoint presentation that you have on your website. So I'm going to try to share my screen. Let's see. There we go.
We're just gonna
Look
bunch
at
this
this,
on.
it's even printed out. I love being back at the state house.
Oh, then you don't, should I not share my screen?
That's fine.
I mean,
You don't need to.
you don't need to. And it's on our website for people who are watching.
Okay, great.
We're doing part one, right?
We're doing part one, but I need to get it up on my screen. Let's see, how am I going to do that? Let's see. Okay, we're good. All right. So we're doing part one. And this is a bit of a daunting task. And I want to say that this is a very rough estimate. It could move up or down by a lot, depending on what happens to COVID cases going forward, depending on how many employers decide to get reimbursed and so forth. I'm on page 4 now. So that just gives an overview of the program as Damien just walked through it. My preliminary estimate is $26 million. That does not include any administrative costs. So that might add, I don't know what, another million, maybe $500,000, who knows? All right, so I'll show you now how I came to that estimate. And I came to it by 2 different approaches because I was so unsure about the numbers. So first, Damien was kind enough to send me a link to the Massachusetts program. Their program is a bit different. And of course, they have a different number of employees in the state and so forth. So their program says the maximum number of hours that could be reimbursed was 40. So basically one week for a full-time employee. The maximum hourly reimbursement, including benefits, which is interesting, was $21.25. So that brings down their cost. The maximum reimbursement per employee was $850, which is quite a bit lower than the Vermont program as proposed. The program was established May 28th, 2021. So for much of that period, they were looking at pretty low caseloads until they got hit in January, February with the spike like everyone else. So as of March 15th, the program will cease because they're running out of funds. They're full.
Interesting, Joyce, though, on these dates, they include Delta also. So this includes Delta.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. The full budgeted amount was $100 million. So I'll also show you how I used a different approach, trying to project Vermont cases and thinking about how many employers would apply for reimbursement, what the average wage would be, and so forth. Okay, so let's start with the Massachusetts program. So I adjusted the Massachusetts program for a difference in the number of hours and the wage rate that was reimbursed. Massachusetts has a somewhat higher median wage rate than Vermont. The duration of the program, the number of employees, share of reimbursement paid by the state, and also for 40% of the Massachusetts program, there was a federal program that paid 2/3 of wages that lasted until September 28th. So again, that meant that they were spending less for the first few months of their program. So once I make all the adjustments, and you can see my pictures down here at the bottom. So I was trying to look at the period of time that was covered by the Massachusetts program versus the Vermont program. And of course, Massachusetts is pretty much in the rearview mirror. So you know what the COVID case was. We have a lot of uncertainty going forward. So it's really hard to know what to project for COVID cases. But my first estimate was about 27.5 million for Vermont coming out of my rough estimates.
Based on the Massachusetts.
Based on the Massachusetts program, correct. Yeah. Okay.
The 27.5 million is your estimate. If you use the parameters or the guidelines of Massachusetts and applied it to Vermont from January 1st, all of calendar year 2022, it will be 27.5 million.
That's right. And I'm assuming that the number of COVID cases per capita over our time period would be similar to that for Massachusetts over their backwards looking time period. So I'm not assuming any further big spikes for Vermont. I'm assuming, reasonable caseloads going forward.
So the fact that the bill in front of us has potential for much greater maximum hourly reimbursement doesn't really change the projections much. Because in the first page, you had it at $26 million using our numbers.
Right. So I basically took the average between scaling the Massachusetts program to Vermont and then my Vermont projecting COVID cases, et cetera, approach, which I'll show you next.
Okay, so there are a bunch of variables we could tweak if we wanted to.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Although I will say that some of them make less difference than you might think. So, for example, your maximum wage is $63.88 per hour, but the average wage that employers would be seeking to reimburse would be much less. I'm assuming something closer to $25 an hour, because most cases occurred in the sort of moderate and lower wage area of employment, because white collar workers often were able to work at home and avoid the COVID pandemic more easily. So you could drop that 63.88 and it wouldn't, it would affect my numbers a little bit, but not a whole lot. Okay. Because it's the average wage reimbursed that really matters.
Go ahead. Just one question before you go on. Do we have any idea in the Massachusetts program how many employers, what percentage of employees that we think might have had COVID, their employers actually applied for the program?
I do not know that.
Application rate or anything like that?
I'm assuming implicitly that it would be the same percentage that would apply, the same percentage of employers would apply in Vermont based on my modeling, right? I'm assuming no difference there.
Right, but I'm just wondering compared to the what's the program called last year? The essential hazard pay program.
Hazard pay.
I
An
remember
essential worker.
being personally involved trying to get some of the big employers to
Right.
apply, and they eventually did, and I think we had a really good penetration rate
Yeah.
of the employer community, but I don't know if that would hold true here.
Right, it's very hard to know, especially with the retroactive cases. Would employers go back in time to get reimbursed? So yeah, that's a big unknown. Okay, let's go on. Shall we go on?
Please.
Okay, so the Vermont cases approach. So here's another heroic effort on my part to project COVID cases going forward. So you can see in my little chart here that we already have January and February in the books, and that amounted to about 46,000 cases. I'm looking at something like an additional 16,000 cases going forward, and you can see how the numbers stay, on the higher end for a couple of months and then drop, especially during the summer. They're very low, and then they creep up a little bit as people come back into closed spaces in the fall and early winter. And I just for illustrative purposes, I showed you the number of cases per day over on the right-hand side. So again, these are purely estimates. Okay, so I'm assuming 62,000 cases over the calendar year 2022. I'm assuming 45% of those cases will be reimbursed for 35 hours. Now, I realize that the maximum number of hours is 80, but that people aren't getting as sick. The maximum or the recommended quarantine time now is 5 days. Not all of those 5 days will be business days. Some of this is to take care of other people who might be sick and maybe you're not doing full-time care. Some of this is to get booster shots or vaccinations or whatever. So anyway, 35 hours and 45% of these cases would be reimbursed for 35 hours. The average wage rate, I'm assuming, as I mentioned, $25 an hour. Okay, so each of those is an assumption that could be questioned or could be tweaked up or down if you wanted sensitivity analysis. But that gives me, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, a comment, the big question here is the retroactive nature, because the price tag drops precipitously if you make it prospective only.
Absolutely. Well, if my guess about COVID cases is close to being right, and who knows that answer. So,
wow, well done, Joyce. Thank you.
Well, I hope so. Time will tell. So the estimate here is 24 and a half. And so I take the average between the Massachusetts case and this projection, and I get 26 million.
All right, well.
Okay, that's the end.
Do you think you might be available, for tomorrow as well, if we had follow-up questions?
Yes, I do have an appointment early in the morning. So if Damien is on first,
Right.
That would be good.
Scott's gonna have to work his magic.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Because we have a bunch and we just should chat about that quickly. Yeah, great, thank you.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll see you probably